The Labor Party will get no criticism from me for pursuing the government over legitimate questions that still remain regarding the background of Victorian Liberal MP Gladys Liu. If a Labor MP belonged to organisations linked to the Chinese Communist Party, the government would certainly pursue Labor, as they did, and quite rightly too, following revelations about the conduct of former Senator Sam Dastyari. Remember the money that changed hands at his preferencing of China's national interest over Australia's when it came to positions of policy. And I've been around in the Parliament long enough to remember when Joel Fitzgibbon, still now on Labor's opposition front bench, when he resigned as the Minister for Defence in the the Rudd government, over disclosure issues and links to a Chinese Australian individual. Now, on the evidence so far, and what we know is merely what's only been reported, Gladys Liu appears to have been naive rather than disloyal, a political babe in the woods rather than crassly self-serving like Dastyari. But then it's still early days. Let's see what else emerges, because the last thing we would want in our Parliament are MPs who aren't totally committed to Australia and its people. To the best of our knowledge, unlike Dastyari, Liu has never pocketed Chinese money for her own personal use. She hasn't directly contradicted government policy on the South China Sea, nor has she tipped anyone off that ASIO was likely to have them under surveillance. In Liu's mind, as a Hong Kong-born Australian citizen of Chinese ancestry, belonging to a series of local bodies sponsored by the Chinese government was probably the equivalent of being a surf club patron or an honorary member of Rotary, as many MPs are. And once, maybe, that sort of association might have been all okay, but today it's now far from innocent, particularly as China has emerged as a massive strategic challenge for Australia and for our allies. But saying that China is no innocent when it comes to meddling in the affairs of another government is not the same as saying the member for Chisholm is guilty of anything. Right now, her only crime is not preparing well enough for her media appearances. But there is a need for her to publicly declare any involvement with the Chinese government and its agencies in clear and specific terms. Initially, we know, she claimed she could not recall being part of two Beijing-linked groups, before later being forced to issue a statement to confirm she was a council member for two China Overseas Exchange Association chapters from 2003 to 2015, so over a decade. Organisations which were later rolled into China's United Front propaganda arm. Now, being involved with these organisations prompts legitimate questions. Has anyone sponsored her travel or that of family members in the past? Has she or family members received any financial assistance or direct funds from a foreign government? Has she met with senior government officials from a foreign government here or while overseas? Are there any concerns over donations she has received or events she has organised or attended? These questions relate to the probity of relationships this Member of Parliament has had in the past that she now admits in a written statement issued yesterday. These questions do not constitute an attack on Chinese-born Australians who, in coming here and making a new life in Australia, join fellow compatriots who have emigrated here since the mid-1800s. But while much of the focus has been on Gladys Liu, in the end, this episode is noteworthy more for what it says about China and our changing and increasingly wary relationship with them than it says anything about a particular MP. As far as China is concerned, the million-plus Australians of Chinese ancestry are still, to them, really Chinese, especially the 500 million plus Australians who were actually born in China. China routinely tries to mobilise these citizens for its own national objectives, whether that's to lobby our government to support something like the Belt and Road Initiative, or to pressure our government to take China's side in international disputes, or to demonise organisations that China thinks are hostile to the Communist Party, like Falun Gong. Now, that's not to say Chinese Australians do China's bidding, not at all. But it's a fact of life that China tries, and that China sees the rules very differently than we do. If people like Professor Clive Hamilton are largely right, and there's no reason not to think that, then Chinese embassy, he says, is actively trying to control the Chinese language media here in Australia and to mobilise Chinese students for Beijing's end, like breaking up pro-Hong Kong democracy demonstrations here. No other country, not even Russia, regards its former citizens abroad as a potential fifth column. But again, China is different. There's no doubt that our relationship with China is a huge challenge for the Morrison government. And for the first time in a long time, I think, we're all waking up to just how big this challenge is now that we're prepared to look beyond the rivers of gold that have come from the north at the relationship and all its myriad of aspects. Of course, the last thing the government should ever do, any government, is make decent Australians who just happen to have been born abroad feel like second-class citizens in their own country. At the same time, though, all these decent and patriotic Australians of Chinese ancestry should not mind if our government takes strong steps to protect our long-term national interest, because part of the very reason they've settled here in Australia is for the freedoms we have here, freedoms denied elsewhere. For the moment at least, Gladys Liu is a problem that it shouldn't be too hard for the government to resolve, provided, of course, it is all as she claims it is. I know some see the hand of Scott Morrison's immediate predecessor behind these leaks, but that's a distraction. The Morrison government has to be careful about rhetorical overreach here. This is not an issue of race. It's an issue about influence and Australia's national interest.